Good evening, everybody. First of all, welcome to another edition of Dive Cuts here on Rock M Radio. We are recording on, I believe it is Tuesday, February 13th. I am not Sam Snelling. I am the much less attractive, much shorter, and Indianapolis residing Matt Harris. I'm filling in tonight for Sam. Sam has other duties that he has to attend to tonight. And I believe he's having dinner with his wife, which, you know, that's better than what we're going to do here during the next hour or so. So I'm going to take over tonight and spearhead this confab about Missouri basketball. Tagging along, and he is to my right, is Matt Watkins. He looks great. He's fresh off a golf trip. He's fresh off of a guest appearance on another Mizzou basketball adjacent podcast, which we're forgiving him for leaving and going to do that appearance. And sir, I want to ask, how are you doing during a bad run for Missouri basketball, but a fabulous week for your brand? It's outstanding what Matt Watkins' brand is doing right now. How are you?
I've been well. I've spent the weekend playing golf. I missed the entire Mississippi State game. I did punish myself by going back and rewatching the entire thing.
I tried to tell you when garbage time was. I tried to tell you when garbage time started.
Yeah, it was not a fun affair. The golf was better. Even a bad day on the golf course is better than a bad basketball game. So I've been good.
Well, I think what we're going to do tonight is a little bit different. You know, we talked about this a little bit, on Sunday when we were planning for podcasting this week. Our schedules are sort of wonky. So that created this sort of mashup that we're doing right now. But I think the other thing is we're at a point in the season where everybody's hitting a wall. Players are hitting a wall. Fans are hitting a wall, watching what's really become a repetitive, sort of process every week. And we are, downstream of that. We are kind of in a rut where we usually review last week. We preview what comes ahead. And, if you listen to the pod over the last couple of weeks, it really sort of sounds the same. We have a team that's struggling. We know why it's struggling. We typically know what the issues are going to be based on no matter what the matchup are, facing them this week. So for one, we think everyone probably just needs a change in tenor, a change in topic. And also it helps this week that Missouri basically has an open week. They don't play, I think, until they go to Ole Miss on Saturday. It's nice that the conference is essentially trying to build in breaks for some of its team this time of year. I think it's a fantastic job to make sure guys and, coaches and players are fresh for the stretch run. But Missouri's 0-11. Even if they were to turn it around late, they probably are not going to escape playing on Wednesday at the SEC tournament. So I think for what we're going to do tonight is we're going to try and take a look ahead. In about 5 weeks, I think the transfer portal will open. And with that will commence, I think, what you and I think is a pretty pivotal month rebuild here. We kind of have an idea about what the freshman class is going to look like coming in next year. We kind of profiled them, when they signed. But really, the thing that might set the ceiling for Missouri next season is what it does in the portal. So tonight we're going to kind of run through roster math. We're going to kind of look at what spots might become available, as we move into that period. How many do we expect to come open at this point? And then I think really importantly, we're going to talk a little bit about what you've been doing over the last month, which is really applying what is Missouri's program building kind of blueprint to what they might do in the portal. It's going to be, evaluating whether they should go young, go old. What might the budget look like for them? And then finally, we're going to violate biblical law and we're going to covet other programs' players. We're going to start giving you names. We've alluded to it. You and I have playlists. We have guys we're watching. We have spreadsheets. It's at that point where I think, we start sharing some names of guys that we like. So does that sound like a good plan? Does that sound enjoyable to you?
I'm on board.
Let's get to it. The first thing we're going to kind of do is talk about roster math at this point. We know that there are 5 freshmen coming in. We know who is leaving. We know Nick Honor is leaving. We know Noah Carter is leaving. And we know Sean East II is leaving. So 3 guys definitely out. And I think the question
Connor Vanover as well.
Connor Vanover as well. Mm-hmm. Connor Vanover as well. So we're at 4. And I think the thing we want to talk about, and I think the thing that I've, sort of constantly heard, at least via social media over the last couple of weeks is, are the freshmen going to hang in here? And so I just want to start there. As you sort of watched the freshmen kind of go through, I think, what has not exactly been probably the most I guess would say, smooth integration into the rotation. Do you think based on what we're seeing, whether it's, run of play right now, whether it's, just how things are going, is there any concern from your seat as to, what the freshmen might do at this point? I think, our understanding has been that there's, relationships are solid, that, they're bought into the long-term vision here, but there's always the reality that when seasons are unfolding and then you get to year-end conversations, maybe things have changed. But I think it's important right off the top to just sort of address that. What's sort of your sense about what we should expect from the freshmen, and maybe there, any worry about them wavering?
Sure. Yeah. When I was going through the process of writing the program building piece, one of the big things that I looked at was the mechanics of Florida State's roster and how they built over time and what the expectation was for players at a given year in the program. And some of Florida State's earlier classes in the 2010s weren't super highly ranked. I think they landed in 30s and 40s, which isn't terribly different than Mizzou's class last year, which I believe was rated 27th.
Yeah.
And if you look back at the average player, if you will, in those classes as a freshman in those early 2010 classes, what you're getting from Mizzou players, Mizzou's freshmen this year, isn't an outlier. It's firmly within the realm of expectation. So when you see the minutes and the actual production, none of the freshmen this year really jump out as like, oh, wow, he's playing way less than you would have expected a Florida State freshman in the early 2010s to play, or done better or worse on the court. It's very similar. And when I look at the guys that they brought in that class, especially Jordan Butler, who Charlton Young brought Jordan's older brother, John Butler, into Florida State and got him into the league. Anthony Robinson, who's been recruited by the staff and, again, Charlton Young since, a decade ago. Trent Pierce is a little bit different in that respect than those two, but they have long-standing relationships. It's not just a transactional situation where they brought these guys in as freshmen, started recruiting them as juniors, and they don't have a pre-existing connection. Trent Pierce, a little bit different situation. They began recruiting him when the staff got at Mizzou. So I won't say it for him. But that being said, it is the transfer portal era. The question, to me at least, will be what kind of market value do those guys have leaving Mizzou? And if they're having freshman-esque years, it's what other programs are going to come and actively bid via NIL dollars for those types of players. And to me, if Mizzou is believing in their development and believing in the guys they brought in, I think they'll be able to match that number, that reasonable number. So, we're not inside the program. We're not inside the day-to-day. Maybe one of these guys is really unhappy and wants to leave. Fair, very fair. But from the outward appearance, to me, even taking away what's going on the court, I really think that these are guys that we're probably going to be coming back next year no matter. But I would feel more confident that all of them come back than more than one leaves. So
I think the thing that I would sort of point out is, you've looked at it from the FSU perspective. When I've had to do the player previews the last couple of years, Jordan is tracking right to what you would expect, even writ large, for his position and where he is in the composite rating. So Jordan Butler's playing about the amount you would expect. And even if you were to even dig in and look at defensive rating, even look at, box plus minus for a freshman at his level, he's right on par. He is basically tacking right toward the median. So I think when fans watch guys, this is probably a good year. The on-court win-loss results are not what you want, but when you watch Jordan Butler play, that's what a freshman of his sort of caliber should look like. And I think that's a good frame of reference too. The one thing I would say for Trent Pierce is, how much of this is illness versus how much of this is, to me, what's happened here, and I'm not being very elegant about this, is they were starting that transition process at Alabama. And then after that, it's just been a plague upon Missouri's house in terms of injuries. Trent Pierce is apparently still, going through an illness. And I feel like if he were fully available, we would have seen probably that distribution of minutes continue. Going into the road trip to South Carolina, where really a lot of the injury issues started to hit, the freshmen had gone from, I think, like 10% of total team minutes, about 16. They were tracking towards 20. If they were all playing 20 minutes a game, that would have been about 30% total minutes. So they were tracking before the injuries and the, maladies hit to play those guys a lot. So I think that's the question is, and we can't answer it because you can't answer a negative. You can't, resolve a negative question there, but would Trent Pierce, had he not gotten sick, be tacking towards that? When I talked to Trent, at times when he was going through his recruitment, he was very clear that the staff sat him down and said, this is a 3-year timetable for you. This is, what we've done with guys like you. This is what we're looking at. And a lot of the early conversations about his first year in college were just changing his body and getting his body ready, getting him used to the physicality of his position. So if that transparency has been from the staff and, they've basically said as well, there could be periods where your minutes really fluctuate depending on our needs. Again, maybe this experience has soured him. Maybe it has changed his mind, but there was nothing in even the short duration of that recruitment that was, I think, miscast as to what we were seeing on the floor here from him. And, when I talked to his high school coaches as well, they were sort of like, it's really going to depend on where he is physically for what you can get from him as a freshman. And I think he looks like he's filled in his frame a little bit, but he's still a guy I think you can need to put some mass on, still some weight on. So again, maybe they get into the room and maybe things have changed and maybe going through a year like this alters that. But I think everything in Trent's recruitment, was pretty open and on the table about what was going to happen. And the same thing sort of with Anthony Robinson, again, to like Jordan Butler, his minutes, what we're seeing from the metrics are even his position, regardless of, if he had been at FSU or not, about normal. So I think, when people talk about, what's this freshman class look like, or, they haven't really popped. This is what they look like as freshmen. This is what a developmental class looks like. And I think you find moments or sort of, narrow niches that these guys, carry out every day, but they're not ready to be even 4th, 5th, 6th guys in the rotation at this point. They look like it. So I think, again, maybe, you talked about NIL, what's the market going to be for them? I even think from a developmental perspective, they're about where we thought they would be.
Right.
And, they're playing hard. They're playing within, the system here. I don't, when I watch them, I don't see disengagement. I see guys playing through tough moments. They're playing through really hard moments right now. Ant had a really, really rough stretch on Saturday. Jordan Butler had one earlier in the week against Texas A&M. They're fighting through it, and this is just what it looks like. I think the one thing that, comes after that is there are really 3 names that I think you and I and Sam have really talked about a lot that we feel, I think a lot of people are, going to deduce pretty easily as being kind of the swing spots. And that's Kurt Lewis. That's Jesus Carolero Martin. And, I think one that, at the beginning of the year would have surprised us a little bit, Aiden Shaw. I think those are the 3 sort of swing spots. So we're a podcast that, I think we try and pride ourselves on making affirmative cases and trying to, look at, why guys should be in instead of out. So I'll just start to you. What do you think is an affirmative case for each of these guys, sticking around for another year? What do you, if you had to sit down and really be honest, but also sort of, look at, what would be a pro for each of them in terms of wanting to stay or keeping them on board?
Sure. Excuse me. Yeah. With Kurt Lewis, just going in order here, I think you look at Sean East. Sean was a quality player last year, but he improved immensely from year 1 to year 2 in the Mizzou program. And I mean, their background could not be any more similar. They're both from Louisville. They both spent 2 years at a D1 program before going to John Logan and get coached by Coach Smith Peters, different ones, but still same situation. Coming to Mizzou, I don't think we've seen Kurt's best this year. I think there's probably more there. And he hasn't performed at the level Sean did last year, but certainly if you believed in him coming in this past year, there's a reason for that. And, another year in the program could very easily see that same development. with Jesus Carolero, it's simple to me. Dennis Gates likes his type of player and the position that he plays.
Yeah.
He's a multifaceted forward, albeit a little undersized, very similar to I'm not putting these guys in the same box as far as quality, but a Kobe Brown, a Noah Carter, a Jesus Carolero, forwards who can dribble, who can pass, who at times have a threat to shoot. Jesus hasn't had the strongest year, but the type, the fit in the system is easy to see there.
Yeah.
And with Aiden Shaw, he's the easiest one to answer. The physical measurables are tantalizing. He's 6'8", 6'9". He can jump over the backboard. He's wiry. He's quick. Those things you can't find off the shelf in the portal. Now his offensive game has not only not progressed, it's arguably regressed. But if the staff believes that they can rectify that, then that's an easy guy to keep around. Because even a moderate offensive threat in Aiden Shaw is a great basketball player.
Yeah.
So
I think that's realistically the question becomes, what do you think? And as in the program thinks it can do with those spots. It really becomes a value proposition at this point. And I don't know if necessarily, and we'll get to this later, that the NIL money here to me is not necessarily like a linchpin in this. It's really about just the quality of the player you can have in that respective spot. Like I think the hard part for people to not understand, but I think it's hard to really understand what injury luck has done is that it's basically, I think, bumped Kurt and Zeus probably like 2 or 3 spots in the rotational order to where, they would normally probably be 10th or 11th in the rotation. Now they're probably closer to 8th or 9th. And what they're being asked to do in those slots is a little bit more expansive than we thought. It's not just the minutes that come with that. It's, Kurt Lewis has to, be able to provide some floor spacing. That hasn't happened. If you're replacing a Caleb Greeley, you've got to be pretty sound and off ball and hold up in some switches. And that's been a struggle at times for him. For Zeus, I think the things that you see on tape can be tantalizing at times, but he's also a guy where his tendencies as a passer tend to pop out pretty well, and opponents have scouted those pretty well, and they sit on them now. And not only that, but they sag off and they basically dare him to score. So the question is, can you rectify those things in an off season? If Kurt does what Sean did, which is get back in the gym and really shoot over the summer, can you get a guy who you don't expect to be a starter level, but can shoot well enough that he justifies being your 8th guy in the rotation? Can Zeus, clean up the turnovers enough to where in a pinch, he's a guy you can play 8 to 10 minutes a night? I think that's really, is it worth letting them have those spots? Do you really think compositionally as a team that's going to work for you? And only the staff knows that. They probably can't even fully evaluate that till they get in the portal and they see, what they can get for those slots. I think we'll talk a little bit later about what the upgrade, possibility would look like. But I think that's for them is, what do they think they can get out of guys who I think at this part, we talk about skill curve sometimes. They're up there. Like there's not like a lot of headroom. These guys aren't going to go from, mid-rotation guys to all SEC honorable mention guys. They're going to be rotational pieces. So you've got to weigh what you can get out of them versus what you think they're going to do in the rotation there at that point. To me, Aiden, I think in our outline, it's Aiden. Because, we've watched him for 3 years. We've watched him in every setting, and you just can't deny the physical that's there. It could be a phenomenal basketball player. It's just been, I think what's been hard this year isn't that, he hasn't blossomed into like a potential, again, honorable mention guy or even like an all SEC caliber guy. I think when we talked in the preseason is he going to be able to find one thing he does really well on offense and that fits what this team needs and get to it? And early on the season, I thought, he wasn't, slashing hard, but he was playing off one dribble, getting to 2 feet and seeming like he was trying to be a guy who could play in that mid post. We saw him with the cutting. We saw him, in lob situations, but I really thought, okay, if he's going to become a driver who's comfortable playing off 2 feet, has some counters, and can make some plays, and can, kick the ball out and move it, that's something you can hang your hat on. But since the Kansas game, it's just been not even a subtle regression. I think when I looked at it, he's minus 79 in minutes at the 4 spot during SEC play. It's really dramatic. And I think, for me, it makes me skeptical about what is there. But, I was going to sort of throw it to you as well. How concerned do you think we should be at this point with what we're seeing in a year where really guys make their biggest gains traditionally? That's not to say it happens for everybody. Timetables are different. But in aggregate, when you look at, how guys make jumps, sophomore year is kind of when it happens. And it's not happening.
Aiden would be one of the players that would be concerning if you look back. And again, as I mentioned yesterday on the St. Louis Post-Dispatch podcast, this isn't necessarily what I had done with the Florida State mechanics of their roster. Their improvement isn't to say that this is what these players are going to do. It's also to say if a player isn't hitting these benchmarks, that's a reason for concern. There's 2 ways to look at that. And with Aiden Shaw, I think he's falling below the benchmarks that you would expect to see in the developmental approach that they used. And that's not to say he won't improve. I mean, for every guy who is above that mark, there are guys below it, but it's concerning. And I think more concerning is just watching him play. It's not that he's not productive offensively so much as he doesn't look to shoot the ball where he did last year. When he gets to the free throw line, his free throw shooting form looks worse than it did last year. It's what has gone on that has caused these problems. And that's the more concerning aspect to me. If he was out there taking a 3-point attempt or 2 a game and just missing them, fine. It's not good, but you at least see the confidence in what they're trying to do. So that to me is the big question, is where he's at in his headspace, where the program's at, thinking that he's going to develop or not. He's the most interesting case of the bunch to me. Mostly because he has multiple years of eligibility left after this one. So, it's a good question. It's one that bears monitoring this spring.
Yeah. I think what's hard for me to watch is that the motor that he plays with at times, it's been known to go up and down, but like on offense, it just doesn't even seem like there's engagement there. Again, I didn't expect based on everything we saw from him coming out of high school, this to be a 1 or 2 year process. I thought it would be incremental, and you would hope as a junior, you'd start to see the pieces come together, and maybe he would break out as a junior, but that required seeing, some nails he could hang his hat on this year. And, if it's not a 45 cut, if it's not a lob in the zone, he's a ball mover. And, there's not, in high school, you would see him catching the corner. And if that rotation was like, he was going to attack baseline, he might not put it down on a guy's head, but he was going to get a foul if he got there. If there was a kick out and a swing to the slot, he would pull. Now he shot 35% from the high school line, which is not bad. The mechanics, didn't always look fluid, but the results were consistent enough. And even in the EYBL, I think he shot like 24% from the NBA line, but median from the NBA line, in EYBL is like 29%. So it wasn't like he was grossly bad. You looked at it and said, okay, we smoothed some things out with the jumper. We'll get a guy who can shoot D1 medium, can probably come in and make shots, with some confidence. But, then we'll build off of that. But we're not even there at this point. And that's concerning is, has it gotten to the point where, him focusing on being a defensive guy and rebounding, has it subsumed that offensive sort of will there?
Right.
And, if it has, how do you get that back? And, we've talked about what you would want to see from him. The template might be KJ Adams, but KJ Adams as a sophomore, you saw punishing teams as a roller. You saw KJ Adams living in that dunker spot, demanding the ball in the dunker spot and attacking there. And then you saw the push shot come this year. You saw the stuff in the mid post come this year. And, maybe Aiden, if he gets in the gym and they have that plan, they attack it relentlessly, could get to a similar spot. But I think the question that they're going to have to ask is, you've got Trent Pierce that's kind of in that spot. You've got Marcus Allen, who's coming in, who's kind of a 3-4 hybrid guy. And, Marcus's jumper, again, inconsistent, but mechanically was in a smoother position than where, Aiden's is now. And, again, we wouldn't expect Jesus Carroll Martin to be a big guy, but that guy you need as a connector in your offense to make some of the Princeton and triangle principles run. So where does Aiden fit in that?
Right.
And, there are going to be the other confounding variables of if, he sits down and they're like, look, there is not 20 minutes a game waiting. There is not, a major offensive role waiting unless we see the progress. And, the NIL budget that we have is going to be static right now. We're not going to take away, but, there won't be the sort of retention bonus in there to keep you from either going to the pros or going in. So, again, I think that meeting is going to be interesting. I think what they do with him will be interesting because you could see it going either way at this point. There was a reason why I think we talked about his offseason last year being so important was I think he had to get a toehold, for them to at least go, okay, he's not there, but he gives us X, Y, and Z, and it's in complement to these other pieces that we have at the spot. And right now, I'm just not sure that, that's quite there. Again, maybe he loves being in the program. Maybe the staff loves his, his presence. Maybe he's doing everything right. And they're like, look, let's give it another go. There's always a way it works. But I think he's the guy that sort of becomes the linchpin for me. Because I think the big question that everyone's going to ask in a couple of weeks is, how many spots do you and I expect to come open? And so I'll start there with you. How many spots are you looking at in a budget? Like just hypothetically right now, not slotting guys, but just knowing what we know about turnover in this environment, knowing what we know about needs that we'll get to. But how many spots would you sit here today expecting to come open?
I would, if I were a betting individual, I'd probably set the over under at 3. Mm-hmm. That seems like a safe number. Mizzou's going to need to replace some players. Sean East has not had the best conference season, but his absence the last 3 games has been marked. Yeah. He was very good leading up into conference play and even a little bit into conference play. And that's not to say he hasn't been good, but he hasn't been as good. But taking a player that takes that amount of volume of possessions out of the game with the efficiency that he does, I mean, that's a big hole that they're going to have to address. And I don't see a player on the roster, both in this year's freshman class and next year's freshman class, the 2024 signees. I do not see a player like that on the roster. Tamar Bates has been asked to assume that role, and he's, he had a very, very good start to conference player, but even then he's dropped off a little bit. And that's easy to understand when you're one of the only offensive threats on the team. You're easy to key on defensively. So that to me is number one, something that they're going to have to address in the spring. Someone who can play on the ball, create for himself and create for others.
I look at what you're going to need with Noah going out the door. Mm-hmm. And I know his production has frustrated people at times because it ebbs and flows. And I know there's questions about shot selection. Does he settle too much? Should he drive it more? But what Noah gives you right now is a guy who's a connector, that can run some of the things they want to run that Dennis would say is triangle inspired. Jesus can run it, but he's not the scoring threat that Noah is. So you put Noah in there as the frontline guy. Do you have a guy right now that if you want to keep that as a core component of your style, they could go into this offseason and say, okay, high school recruiting is where we want it. We can start to really sort of sunset some of the triangle stuff. We're going to go other directions. But if they want to keep that, they're going to, I think, need someone who can operate in that way. Mm-hmm. Jesus Carolina Martin's the only one that can, but I don't know if necessarily you want to have that guy as, just from what he's giving you individually offensively, 20 to 24 minutes a night. So I think they're going to have to go into the portal and try and find that, or somebody that approximates that, to your point, on ball creation. Either do they get someone out of the portal that can backstop that, or do they go get two guys that can sort of bifurcate the creation stuff there? I'm with you. I think there's probably 3 spots. I think you're going to need an on-ball creator. I think you're going to need, probably, like we said, a big of some sort.
Right.
Is that a creator in Noah, or is it a guy that is purely there to defend, rebound, and kind of be an enforcer for you? Mm-hmm. There are guys I think that could get in the portal that could be that. And then I think you and I have sort of come down to, what do you do with the third spot? If you've got a ball handler, what are you going to do with, and you want to get a big of some sort? Do you get another big? Do you really supplement there? Or do you go and sort of try and find somebody that, is another perimeter threat for them? I think that sort of is going to be the linchpin in a weird way, is what do they do with the potential third spot? Mm-hmm. I think it'll give us a lot of indications about what they want to do with the roster setup. I think the thing that I'm really eager to talk about, and that you're writing a lot about, is, this week I think is what kind of players are in the portal. There's a lot of them. There have been a lot of them. But I think what happens is every spring we see guys go in and we look at the counting stats and we're like, oh God, this guy averaged 18, 4, and 3. And you'll be like, well, it's on the number 260 team in KenPom and the number 25 conference in the country. How's that going to scale? And so you've looked at this a lot. And so I just want to throw open to you. How do you sort of view the transfer market, just writ large? When you sit down and when we get into March, are you thinking it's a time to go get some steals, or is it just, we have to keep the expectations a little bit more modest? I'll throw it open to you, because I think you and I are similar but different. We kind of view the portal.
Yeah, I mean, it is fun when you're a team in need of talent, and you open up Twitter and you see, such and such has entered the portal. They have these great stats. Oh, such and such entered the portal. They have great stats. And it's, we should get this guy. We should get this guy. I think there's a lot more to it. First of all, obviously you have to consider about the cost. Yeah. I'm not going to spill all the beans on my final installment, but that's a big thing I focus in on, and that is the acquisition cost of what is effectively free agents. And if you follow professional sports, which I'm guessing most of you do if you're listening to a sports podcast here, free agents are more costly than developmental pieces. That's just the nature of the game. And granted, the pay structure in college is different. It's radically different than a CBA sport in the pros, but still, freshmen of the likes that Mizzou is recruiting are inherently less costly than instant impact portal pieces. So you have to look at that in context. And this isn't to say that you can't get those guys, but you can't go into the spring and say, I want the top 3 portal players in the country at Mizzou. It's just not going to happen. No team is going to get the top 3 guys because A, they need the money, and B, they need the shots. Yeah. And 3 of those guys aren't going to want to play together. So the way I look at it is I'm trying to identify what this team is both A, losing, and B, needs already, and try and formulate ideas for how that could look in what the spring shopping list could be. And that's how I got onto the on-ball creation. It's not just they need a point guard. Yes, Nick Honor and Sean East graduate. It's more than that. Mizzou really doesn't have the creative talent that they had last year with Kobe Brown's absence, and then also with Sean East being out. Yeah. Sean did a good job comparatively in backfilling that, but it was still not enough. Yeah. And when I look at a team like Mizzou, I see a lot of guys who are dependent on others to create offense for them. And that's not a bad thing. Tamar Bates is very much that way. Yeah. He operates a little bit inside ball screens. He can do a little bit on his own, but the bulk of his offense is created by others getting him open shots or getting him in position where he can score on his spots on the floor.
Yeah.
And I think at least two of Mizzou's spots this year, whether it be a point guard and a big, any combination, two of them have to be offensive creative spots.
Yeah.
So whether that's, as we talked about earlier, a Kobe Brown type, which is incredibly rare. If there was a Kobe Brown type in every portal, Dennis Gates would be in a great position to land him because they could say, hey, look what we did with Kobe. You could be that guy. Fact is, there just aren't that many of them.
Yeah.
So it's a look at the types of players that are needed, the roles that are filled, and what might be available on their cost. That's how I kind of view it at this stage of the game.
Yeah. For me, when I start handicapping the portal, I think you can go and get borderline all conference guys. Mm-hmm. So you use BPR for your piece, which I think is fantastic. I tend to use box plus minus because it's older and we can go get more guys. I think Evan's doing a really, really great job trying to quantify and, use Bayesian principles to kind of stratify guys in 1 to 200, 250 to 500 kind of rankings and put that with a single number. But box plus minus, pretty good overall. Dean Oliver's had it for a long time. It can really work well. What you usually see is about, like, if you were to go look at Sports Reference or if you were to go even look at Bart Tordovic, 4.0 BPM is pretty much the cutoff. And if you were to look at, for example, ball handlers from last year, that equates to about Walter Clayton at Florida. So a very solid point guard for a team that's probably going to earn a solid seed in the NCAA tournament. That's about what you're looking at. Dalton Connect, clearly an outlier. I don't even think Tennessee expected Dalton Connect to be Dalton Connect at this point. But you can generally find at the top end, like a Cash Robinson from a couple of years ago, a Walter Clayton, guys who are very solid starters on an NCAA tournament team. A lot of times your star talent, as you said, is going to be developed in-house. So realistically, how I look at it is the best you can probably do in the portal, and you can correct me if I'm not applying, Evan's BPR to kind of ranking tier properly, is probably guys that are pushing the top 250 in the country, probably somewhere in there from a BPR perspective. So really anybody inside the top 250, if they're going in the portal, is going to be insanely expensive and they're going to eat up a lot of your budget. Mm-hmm. So if you have one need, like Kansas, they needed a big, and Kansas said, we're going to go get Hunter Dickinson because we need one dude at one spot because we got all these other guys, and to make our system work, we're going to go throw the whole kitchen sink at this guy. If you have a short list of needs and you can pinpoint it and write it down, go do it. If you are Missouri and you have multiple needs, you get into scarcity very, very quick. And even if you needed two top 250 guys, it would probably compress the budget quite a bit. So right. Is that probably the best way to think about it and to merge our thinking on this?
Yeah, I think so. And interestingly enough, I will have a comparison in the final installment of all SEC in transfers, first-year SEC transfers, and how they did via BPR in the final installment of the series to give a comparison. And Mizzou last year fared very, very, very well in that. when you take a guy like Demoy Hodge, who, I'm sure he got money to come to Mizzou, but I think it was mostly that he was following Dennis Gates to Mizzou, and he had been a good player at Cleveland State, but he was never as good at Cleveland State as he was at Missouri in the SEC, which that's not normal. Mizzou hit it out of the park there. I think that's a good way of looking at it. It's with Mizzou, I think I don't want to say in a better spot than they were last year, but I think one thing that they have going for them is if they only need 3 spots, you're not having to get 5 or 6 players in the portal like they had to do last year. And when you look at it, it's like going shopping. If you have three items that you need to buy, you can spend more money on them individually than if you have 6 items you need to buy. It's simple math.
Yeah.
And, I know NIL budgets aren't static. I'm sure if Dennis Gates really wanted a guy and he went to the purse strings at Mizzou and said, hey, this is the difference between us failing and succeeding next year, they would probably help it out. But if he knows that about a guy, other programs know that about a guy.
Yeah.
So it's very much like the free agent market in professional sports. It's who can offer me the most money combined with a little bit less, the best opportunity. So with Mizzou needing 3 spots, 2 of them which need to be pretty impactful spots, it's a challenge, but I think it's doable if they do it right. And I have no doubt, I have no doubt that they know what they need and that they're going to go try and get it.
Yeah. And the one thing I would mention too is there was a part of the budget that they had locked up probably before the withdrawal deadline for Kobe Brown to come back. I think, there was still a little bit of a period, I think going into late April where they were still trying to figure out what that was going to be. And then the intel came back and it was pretty much that he was going to be a borderline first round guy. But the thing about it is too, at least last year, I was a sicko and I tracked at least the big man spot, kind of the rate of commitments. And you see that first wave really crest about the 3rd week of April. That was about the time they learned that Kobe was probably going. When Kobe learned he was going was at the absolute worst time for them because we have all this budget that's opening up and all the guys that we might have wanted are gone. And so if you were to look back and say, okay, could they have thrown a lot of money at Caden Chedrick? Maybe they had more flex. They'd have more flex this year for that if Texas came in with late offer. If Michigan comes in and really plunks a lot of money down for Caleb Love, can you sit there and go, we might have Kobe back? Now you can go, okay, we'll match. So I think that's the thing to keep in mind too, is are they going to have an ability to essentially have some more budget to match with? That's something, again, that we'll see moving forward. You've got it in your piece. We can talk a little bit here. When we talk about budget, what do we think the median cost for transfers? I know that there have been various places that have tried to peg it. I think Matt Norlander talked to coaches and said like an up transfer to a starter at a high major is probably about $250,000. But I was just sort of curious. What do you think is for people to have an understanding here? These can change. It's a black box. We don't know them. Sometimes the people don't even know the program don't know it until it's officially decided because they, under NCAA rules, even though Tennessee's challenging it, you can't exactly handle these. What rules? Now it's legal. So what do you think is a good frame of reference number here? It doesn't have to be perfect, but in your really collating all this stuff, what do you think is a good number for us to have in mind?
I've asked around, not with people in the program necessarily, but just in the industry, and I've done a lot of reading on it. And I would say that as the most common answer is similar to what Norlander had in his piece, and that was about 200,000. The range was typically 100 to 300,000, 200 being the midpoint of a player that is not necessarily an up transfer, but any transfer into a high major program that is projected to be a starter. So when you look like a Caleb Grill, a John Tonje, that market of players is what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I don't know what they got. Don't say that Matt Watkins said Caleb Grill got 200,000. I have no idea. But that mold of player. Now, when you look at an impact player like Hunter Dickinson, I'm sure that he was much higher than that.
Yeah.
There are players that got more than that. There are probably players that got less than that. So, I don't know what these guys got individually, but if you can find a guy like Tamar Bates, who was not probably projected to be a starter at a high major level by most programs, considering he was at a high major program and was not a starter, that's a boon in value. Whereas if you have guys get hurt that are projected to be starters and not playing, you're losing money. So, I would say that's a good frame of reference. So, when you're looking at Mizzou's needs last year, you're talking about $1 million just for baseline expectations, needing a 5-man rotation, which is almost what they needed going into the portal season last year. So, it's completely word of mouth. It's always changing, depends on who you ask, but you can get ideas. And I think Mizzou is pretty competitive in NIL.
Yeah, I think
the football program showed that with their recruiting. I think basketball can be. So I'm not sitting here saying like, oh, Mizzou can't get these guys. I'm not crying poor by any means. I think Mizzou is very competitive within their league, which is the highest.
Yeah.
If not the highest, among the highest NIL competitors in college sports.
And really what we're driving at here, I think, is what's the best value that they can do for their money. And really, I think the thing that a lot of us, I look at it this way. One, you can go older. Mm-hmm. And that's great because when I crack open Synergy, there's 4 years of data. When I go and I pull up old games, I can get 12 games of a guy from just last year, cross-reference that with Synergy, and I can say, yeah, this guy does X, Y, and Z. We did it this year. People hopefully saw it with the previews. I can sit there and I can tell you what a guy does really well, how he maps onto what happens here. There is, on the drawback side, kind of in some cases a limited ceiling for those guys. As you said earlier, there are not Demoy Hodges happening every year. It's a very rare thing. So you kind of know what John Tonje was going to be. I had 4 years of John Tonje. I could tell you that when healthy, he banged in shots off the catch, he could guard off the ball, and he rebounded exceptionally well for his spot. Mm-hmm. And if you were looking to plug that in, which Missouri needed shooting, needed off-ball defense, and it sure as hell needed rebounding, that was a guy to go get. Now, the thing about it is, as you pointed out, they're also costly. They can be costlier, I should say. Flip that, it's usually only 1 year. So you get that budget back really quickly. Right. So the allure I see, obviously, for some coaches is, if I need to go get a dude, I can correlate it. I'm going to get my money back really quickly. And even if there's a limited ceiling, maybe there's some certainty and some consistency there. Conversely, if I go younger, you're going to get maybe some downstream consequences that are good, namely continuity. And I think we've had this conversation before. I'll be quick here. There are lots of talented teams in the NCAA tournament. There is random luck that strikes. But again, if you look over the last decade and you look at kind of a unifying theme for teams, whether they were getting top 10 classes or they were, doing it right and through development, they're usually in the top 100 in continuity. They build cores, they keep 5, 6, 7 dudes together, they develop an identity, and then they absolutely hammer the crap out of people in years 3 and 4. Right. If you take young guys like a Tamar Bates coming off a really frustrating sophomore year, but was a former top 50 guy, you develop him and you get 2 or 3 of those guys together. One, they're affordable because they're leaving because they're looking for more minutes, they're looking for more shots, they're looking for a better scheme fit, and they're willing to trade budget to get that. You can get 3 or 4 of them together over a couple of years. You take some lumps early, but you build continuity. Trade-off is those guys compete with your freshmen for minutes. Right. They can, next year, if you bring in some young guys that are looking to reboot, they're fighting with other young guys who are looking to get established. So you kind of have to, weigh who you think is going to have the better payoff down the line. And do those guys want to stick? Because sometimes, as we're going to see potentially next year, young teams that are not blue bloods typically struggle. It's about a 50. I think I looked at it recently. It's about a 50-50 shot to make the NCAA tournament. Are your guys willing to stick through that? Are they willing to fight and try and earn roles? And, there's the political element of that is if you're coming off this season and there's pressure, there will be more pressure next year. Do you want to go through maybe a pseudo rebuild or a softer rebuild in year 3? Those are the two sort of tracks I see. Am I missing anything in terms of how people should look at those?
No, I 100% agree with that. And the only thing I would add on that is perhaps even more important, and I don't want to diminish the thoughts and what have you of our fans by any means, but
it's on what DRF thinks of them.
College sports is now funded by the fans. It always paid the tickets, but now you're asking the people who root for the program to pay for the players to come here. So, that's also an element to it is when Dennis Gates is looking at building a program next year, how are the big money guys that are funding the NIL operation, are they on board with another year? Do they say, hey, you need to go win next year, otherwise we're not paying any more money? Right. I don't know what their thought is. I have no idea, but that's a consideration that wasn't one 10 years ago. So there's a lot of moving pieces with that, but I would agree that the older guys, you're pretty confident what you're going to get from them. The younger guys are where you're typically going to get that. I shouldn't say typically, but you're more likely to get the Tamar Bates explosion and the Demoy Hodge, which that's still a complete outlier in all respects. But that's the type of surplus value, to use a term that you get from guys that you bet on talent,
right.
where they may have been tilled over in their prior programs. So, a John Tonje, we didn't get it because he was hurt, but I probably could have pegged him as far as a numerical value pretty close to where he would ended up.
Yeah.
Tamar Bates, I was wildly off because he was way better than I would have expected.
Right. Now the fun part. We've been doing this for 50 minutes and people may have fast forwarded to get here. Let's cast our eyes around and oogle at other rosters, because that's what coaches are doing right now. That started for coaches in January.
Mm-hmm.
Tampering season started in late December. So we've put this off until probably the latest we could go here. There are guys that are tracking this with better, like, direct intel directly on prospects. Trilly Donovan is one of them. There are sometimes you pick up stuff from coaches and from guys who are around. It's usually on background. But we have a kind of a sense for some names that we've been watching probably for a month now.
Mm-hmm.
And generally how you and I do it is a little bit differently. I think I'm a guy that the first thing I do is I go and I look at, probably the top 30 guys at every position that were in the transfer portal last year. I try and stratify them based off percentage of minutes, offensive rating, usage, BPM. Basically
Mm-hmm.
4 things, and I try and set the normal range and then the median, and then I use the median as the floor, and I go through Torvik, and I begin looking at guys who are playing now who are not fifth-year seniors. I don't want to try and guess what a guy is. So I do that for the 3 spots that we talked about, which are point guard, kind of a bigs, and then I did kind of wings, just because wings can be different, scoring wings can be different types. I'm at and I got to about a pool of 50 players. I don't know how you do it, but what's sort of your process that you look at as you sort of begin to take in names that you want to try and watch a little bit of or suss out?
There's a variety of things. It's, I spend a lot of time watching basketball. I spend a lot of time on Hoops Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
My Twitter account is very carefully curated, where it's basically college sports from college basketball only. So, I see guys, it might be a 30-second video of someone who has a highlight video, and I'm like, oh, this guy's interesting. So then I go and engineer it that way. But I certainly do it in the same manner that you do as well. Try and get a field of names, guys that I may not have heard of before, guys that I may not have seen play the game before, to get a better grasp of the entire field. But it's just, I don't have a specific method, but it's an accumulation of sources.
Yeah. Who's the Supreme Court justice that said you can't define pornography, but you know it when you see it? To borrow an example from your vocation. What I'm going to do is I figure we'll alternate, and we'll try and hit 3 or 4 names of guys that we like a lot. What you're going to hear is probably, again, point guards, bigs, and maybe some wings in here. Mm-hmm. These are by no means connected to Mizzou. There is nothing that has bound them yet. What we are saying is if you tuned in to watch these guys, you're going to get a pretty good sense for guys who might be near the top of the portal heap and guys that kind of are representative of what you can get. I'd say in the top 20% of the market right now. So we're looking at the top end. We won't be sickos until March and we see real names. But for right now, we're going with names that we think, a lot of people will probably hear, and, there'll be competition for these guys. But this is a good sort of way for if you're out here and you're looking for other games to watch, if you've kind of checked out on Mizzou, these are just some other good guys just to watch. So I figured I'd kick it off by going with the ball handler category.
Okay.
And Donovan Dent at New Mexico. Really, really good player. 6'2" point guard, came out of California. He was kind of under recruited in high school. Rick Pitino landed him, I think, like in June before his senior year. Kid goes to Section 7, which is like a big high school kind of style tournament out in Arizona, blows up, plays at Centennial High. He's on a loaded roster with some other top 150 guys, high majors, start nosing around, and he shuts it down. He says, no, I'm loyal to Richard Pitino. I'm going to go to Albuquerque. He's been fantastic. You'll look at his assist rate, it's 31%. That's fantastic given his usage of around 24%. But what really jumps out is how secure he is, given how much creation he has to do. He only turns the ball over 15% of the time. That's kind of been a benchmark for Dennis Gates ball handlers. So 15% turnover rate for a guy is good. That's around what Missouri is. Cleveland State has been as a team when it's humming. Even better, his assist to turnover rate, I think, is now like 2.8. So nearly 3 assists for every turnover. So high usage, throwing the ball all over the floor, and not coughing it up, or rarely coughing it up. And I think the big thing when you tune in to watch Donovan, watch how often he's making plays within the structure and flow of a set. And contrast that to Sean East. And Sean is great, I think, at freelancing, at using a ball screen and then just sort of getting in and cracking open a shell by weaving around. Dent is a traditional setup man. He's fantastic about teeing up off-ball defenders, fantastic about teeing up help defenders, delivers the ball where it needs to go, averaging, I think, 1.1 points per pass to rollers, 1.6 to cutters. He's phenomenal at it. Not bursty, but he's got really good pace, changes speeds really well. But he's an undersized kind of guy. He can get picked on and targeted defensively, which we've seen. But I think what I love is if you want an on-ball creator, somebody who's going to come in and can run your team. If you feel like you're going to go heavier into pistol stuff, you're going to go heavier into, 5 out, Donovan Dent's the guy you go get. I think the thing that, too, is people have complained about the off-ball stuff when they play in this. Donovan's good enough within a structure that you can start building on in off-ball actions to really leverage guys. So, defensively, there might be questions. You might wonder how he's going to finish the rim. But if you are just looking for the best pure facilitator that might come on the market from a league that's going to put 6 teams in the NCAA tournament, it's Donovan Dent. So that's where I'll start. Who do you think people should be watching maybe at the ball handling spot?
Well, my first option is going to be someone who you really can't watch because he plays on a team that only plays on the Pac-12 network ever.
Hey, Fox Sports will put him on. Fox Sports will put him on.
But one guy that I noticed early, and this was kind of doing the field research, just looking at numbers instead of seeing the guy play first. But Miles Rice at Washington State, really, really cool story. He was out of Georgia. I believe he came from South Carolina, went to high school in Georgia, played with Jabari Smith in high school.
Game elite kid, so connections that Missouri's got into that program a little bit.
Right. He went to Washington State, redshirted his first year. Prior to his sophomore year, he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and sat out his entire sophomore year and underwent chemotherapy, found out that he was in remission last spring, and then entering his junior year, which by eligibility terms was his freshman year, has just exploded onto the scene as a playmaking point guard for the resurgent Washington State team. So Kyle Smith, who I'm a big fan of, has a knack for finding undervalued players in high school. Consider Miles Rice to be one of them. His game is really somewhat simple but very effective. He's very fast. He plays in transition. All he does offensively is ball screens. I mean, his usage on that, I believe, was something like 45% of his offense came from ball screens, and another 25% was transition. So that's what he does. He's not a strong shooter off the catch, but he is an elite shooter off the bounce. And the one thing that it really strikes me is that he gets to the rim and finishes. I think that's something that Mizzou's sorely been lacking this year. And he's a guy that if he's not finishing at the rim, he's going to the line to shoot free throws. And if he's not allowed to get to the rim, he's pulling up and shooting off the bounce at a high level. So a player like that, who is also competent defensively, very good at creating steals, is enticing to me.
Yeah. By contrast to him, there's a guy I like at St. Joseph's. You probably have another guy on that roster. I don't know how Billy Lang's team is in the middle of the pack, but there's a reason why he's on the hot seat. Eric Reynolds, a guy who, if you follow NBA draft scouting at all, kind of considered like a fringy dude, kind of like maybe a a G League contract guy or back into the second round flyer. He's a junior. He's 6'2". He's out of Maryland, out of the Bullis school there. What I would say about this is if you're just looking for a dude who gets buckets, that's what Eric Reynolds does. He is smaller. He's not exactly the strongest guy. I think he's only 6'2", 180, like I said. But he is fantastic at, shooting the ball off the catch. I think he's 44% on threes off the catch. Even better, off the bounce, he's at around 39%. So if you put him in handoffs, if you put him in ball screens, and that defender goes under, he's going to pull, and he's going to shoot at a really, really high clip. He doesn't always finish as well around the rim because you can bump him off driving lines. You can make him change some release angles, but he's got a pretty good free throw rate, I think around 30%. So he will get to the line. Defensively, again, sort of small. I think that's sort of the thing you're going to run into with some of these guys. Rice, maybe not so much, but as you look around the portal, you're going to be finding a lot of ball handlers that are probably, 2 to 3 inches short of what we would consider kind of the positional standard for their size. So you're going to be trading that out for a little bit of either one speed. You're going to be changing it out for either fantastic on-ball, scoring, on-ball facilitation. And I think the thing to consider, too, is Missouri's personnel around these guys may be bigger, so they might be attuned to that. But I get why some people might be worried about smaller guards because we just watched 2 smaller guards get targeted in ball screen for a couple of years. So Eric Reynolds at St. Joseph's is a guy I really, really like a lot. It'll be interesting if he would go into the portal or if he would go to the pros if there's a change at St. Joseph's. But that's a guy that I like a lot. He's also played really well in kind of marquee games against Villanova. He's played really well at Kentucky in a game that St. Joseph lost by overtime. He's played great against a Princeton squad that's dominating the Ivy League. He has put up numbers.
Don't mention that name. Princeton. What is that?
He's putting up numbers against teams that have hurt Missouri in recent years.
How did he do against Norfolk, Matt? Moving on.
Do we want to talk about Cam Christie at all?
Sure.
We're at an hour 2 here, but do we want to talk about Cam at all? Because I know you brought him to me, and I was skeptical. And then I put on the tape, and I looked at the numbers. I went back and watched Missouri's game against him, and I was persuaded. So I have him on my list, but I feel like you are the Cam Christie truther. So
We don't need to do a full treatment of him because Mizzou recruited him, which is initially why he was on my radar. And of course, his brother is in the pros now after a very stellar freshman year at Michigan State a few years back. But he's got the pedigree. He's something that if you're looking for a wing, he's a excellent spot up shooter. He's got good positional size. I think he's 6'6" or so.
Yeah.
Will he leave Minnesota? We don't know. I mean, Ben Johnson has kind of turned that thing around, but if you're looking at guys who Mizzou's recruited and might be looking to parlay that impressive freshman appearance into more money, that's an option. So yeah. I think that probably does it with Cam Christie. I do like him, but we can toss out a few other names. If we're
the only reason too about Cam that I would bring him up is that he kind of illustrates what we were talking about earlier. He's going to be a sophomore. He is produced at the Big Ten level in high minutes. He is rebounding at a high rate as well. Great off-ball defender. He's scoring on only 17% usage. If you're looking for kind of a guy to be a complementary wing piece to Tamar and even a freshman like Honor Batang, that might be a guy who can give you some spacing. And, he has shown more recently some ability to play out of DHOs and pull-ups. Again, now you're getting crowded because you got Honor coming in on the wing. You got Marcus on the wing. You get
Honor Boateng, not Nick Honor.
Honor Boateng on the wing. And they're recruiting some guys in 25. So if you're bringing in a young guy, this one you might have to pay more for because he's produced at a high major level. But if you believe in him, you've scouted him through high school, and you believe that this could be a guy that can help you, you'd have to go that way. I foisted Cam Christie on you. Is there any other kind of guys that you're looking at that you think are interesting?
The potpourri section I haven't done a whole lot of work in. I've been focusing mainly in on those 2 primary positions. So that's kind of something I haven't got to yet. So we can all punt on that. Okay.
I was going to say the bigs. I have a big I love. He's at Charlotte. His name's Igor. It's fantastic. Igor Milicic. Jr., again, we don't know if he'd go in the portal. There had been some scuttle that he might look at going if the payday was right. Igor is Polish. His dad has coached at various EuroLeague spots. That is very, very good. He has played well in FIBA Euro games for his age bracket. Originally signed with Virginia, as Tony Bennett is wont to do with his young bigs. He got parked for a year. He did not like that. So he transferred to Charlotte, where he is really blown up this year, playing for Aaron Fern, who is kind of a good fit for him. Aaron Fern's an Aussie, kind of brings kind of a Euro mentality to how his teams play, particularly in terms of physicality, in terms of how they set up lineups. He is just a big that I think if you want a jumbo version of somebody who's Kobe-esque, it's him. Mm-hmm. He can play at the elbows. He can play out top. He can space the floor. And his ability to read the floor, particularly from the strong side and off-ball action, is fantastic. Can throw passes with either hand. A little bit better off the live dribble with his right than his left. But he can put it in shot pockets. He can hit cutters in tight windows. Not a ton of vertical pop standing, but if he gets a little bit of momentum, he can get off the floor, and that matters because defensively he's a good rebounder, really good rebounder for his size. But he is a 5-man that if you're looking for somebody that kind of matches what Dennis wants skill-wise, it's Igor Milicic. He's playing in the AAC, which is down a little bit after some teams left. But that team's 9-2. He's driving a lot of what they do. I think from a scheme fit perspective, he'd be really, really great. Another name to watch that I can see folks immediately sort of getting there if there's a change that happens is Terrace Reed at Michigan. There has always been some scuttle that will Jawan Howard be back next year. Terrace Reed, if you forgot about him, he was a really good player at Chaminade, transferred to Link Academy as a senior. He's out of St. Louis. He's got a really, really good brother, Tristan Reed, in 2026. Terrace signed with Michigan, had a really solid freshman year, kind of as a backup big behind Hunter Dickinson. Really carved out a niche as kind of a good post defender, good rim protector, insanely good rebound rates for a freshman. When Hunter left and they brought in Olivia Akamwa, the thought was maybe he would kind of grow into more of a traditional post threat for them. The offense has come and gone for him. Michigan has struggled mightily this year. Obviously, they are near the bottom of the Big Ten. The question that you would have to ask is if Terrace went the portal, would you want to bring him back? You look at the physical profile, he's a little different than the bigs that Dennis has recruited before. He's put on weight to deal with the rigors of the Big Ten. He is more of a traditional 5. He's going to anchor a bit. But I would say the one thing to look at is when he was at a little bit of a lighter frame in high school, he was really, really good playing at the elbows. He could drive it. He had a nice little kind of form shot, not explosive off the floor there, but good shooting mechanics. And what he will do, bar none, is hit you on box outs, go to the glass, and he will protect the rim vertically. So the bet you would make with Terrace is similar to what you made with Tamar Bates. Things haven't gone well here over 2 years. Come here, reboot. Maybe you take a hit in portal money to do it, but come back home, get back close to an environment that's conducive to you and make it work. So that would be the other name I would sort of put a pin in. So we're kind of, to recap, we like Donovan Dent, a point guard at New Mexico. We like Miles Rice, kind of a point combo mix at Washington State. We like Eric Reynolds at St. Joseph's. We have a minor affinity for Cam Christie, assuming he comes onto the market. Igor Milicic, a post from Charlotte, and Terrace Reed at Michigan. Does that sound like a pretty good hit there?
Yeah, that would keep people busy till next week if they want to.
Next week,
they want to go watch some games.
If they want to dip into,
we have many more, but we don't want to overload you in your homework assignments for the week.
Yeah. You could spend Saturday doing that instead of getting frustrated potentially at what's going on in Oxford. With that, we're going to wrap this up. Matt's done really, really great stuff. He's got the final installment of his sort of verdict piece looking at Florida State's kind of template for program building and how that might apply for Missouri. The last two have been really, really good, I think, in terms of really giving us a good sense for how the market is going to work in roster construction now. I think a lot of us have sort of talked about what Florida State did. We could see the template. We've thrown around the term Raptors a lot here in relation to CY. But I think the last 2 weeks are really, really important to understand kind of the lay of the land as to what Missouri is going to be facing when it goes into March. What it's going to face in terms of identifying talent, what the resource sort of allocation is going to have to be. That post probably around 1 tomorrow. That's when they've been going up. I would go read that. Our beat writers are hanging in there. They're doing great stuff, trying to keep tabs on this. I know it's not been fun content to read, but they're doing a great job. We've added a whole bunch of new writers to the site. We got Chad Moeller, a former football SID, writing about all things Mizzou. We had a good piece today about what the future Memorial Stadium might look like now that it's going to get 50 million in retrofitting done. We got Nathan Hurst doing some good stuff on football. We're still having a bunch of Olympic sports coverage. I think we had over the weekend gymnastics, softball, baseball. It's all there. We are potting still. We are here giving you 70 minutes of basketball content this week in a game where Missouri doesn't play at all. We thank you for hanging in with us. We thank you for listening, reading, consuming, tweeting at us. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Matt J. Harris 85. You can find Mr. Watkins at Data Mizzou. We'll be back next week. We hope, we pray to any deity that the losing streak will end and we'll have something positive to talk about. But Matt, am I missing anything? Is there anything else I didn't plug? Any praise I didn't dispense?
No, they just need to sacrifice a live chicken in the locker room or something.
In the old Tad Pad, you could have found a squirrel in the visiting locker room and
whatever,
and really made things weird. But now we gotta, you know what? They'll just go to the chicken stand in the gas station chicken in Oxford, and we'll do what they did in Major League. So, with that incredibly poor outro, we're gonna let you get back on going with your week. Thanks for listening. Have a great rest of the day, and again, thanks for joining us on Rock M Radio. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, just click the subscribe button below. And you can find this podcast through the Apple Podcast app or for iPhone, or the Google Podcast app for Android, or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. We are also available on Spotify. Just search for Rock M Radio. And if you like other sports, Fans First Sports Network is a podcast network that has coverage of all other teams, Major League Baseball, MLS, NFL, whatever you want to listen and read about. It is a great network full of really fantastic podcasts. So look them up and subscribe to any and all of those podcasts. Rock M Radio will be back with more episodes coming soon. Thanks.